Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the fourth class of the course Digital Technologies and Physical Change, how technology enables real, tangible innovation in heritage preservation. This course is part of the Archive Online Academy and it has been curated by Factum Foundation. Today, we'll continue the discussion on provenance, fragments, and restitution. We'll start the class with Mary Landing and Erik Langdalen, professors of architecture at the Oslo School of Architecture and Design. They will explore the concept of provenance, which traditionally traces the chronological history of movable objects, such as sculptures, paintings, archaeological fragments, volumes, and much more. But the concept can be also applied to built heritage. They will present the provenance project, reframing architectural provenance as a dynamic phenomenon that help us interpret the past, present, and future of buildings, and archiving their fragments too. Then Adam Lowe, founder of Factum Foundation and Factum Arte, and Ferdinand Saumarez-Smith, director of Factum Foundation London, will address the topics of repatriation, restitution, and replication. Thanks to online catalogs and digital collections, it is now easier to trace the provenance of objects dispersed around the world and identifying the fragments held in various museums and of course determine their original locations. However, when dealing with repatriation and restitution, it is essential to rethink ideas of ownership, preservation, as well as originality and physicality, and to develop practical solutions. Thank you, Mary and Erik, for accepting our invitation. And well, I will welcome again to this class of the Archive Online Academy and leave the floor to you right away.
Good afternoon, wherever you are. So I am Mari Lending. I'm a professor of architectural history and theory in Oslo. I'm directing this project that I will present, Provenance, Projected Architecture Past and Future in the Era of Circularity. I'm afraid there will not be too much digital the next 20-30 minutes, but I will talk about provenance and the ways that in which we are tweaking or reconceptualizing that old concept in this research project. And clearly, provenance is an issue in all sorts of way in regards also of digital reproductions and reproductions in the cultural world. So hopefully this will resonate with things that you are discussing in this course. And then, as already mentioned, my colleague Erik Langdalen will take over and present an archive of building parts, etc., made to better understand the physiognomy of both individual buildings, architectural artifacts, and global networks of architectural transactions. So I'm presently happily on sabbatical at the moment. I'm working on a book entitled Auctioning Architecture within the framework of provenance. It's on houses, on entire rooms, facades, and architectural elements cut out of existing or demolished buildings, as well as fittings, fixtures, and site-specific furniture designed by architects, sold in auctions since the mid-18th century. My main medium is auction catalogs, a completely overlooked genre within architectural history, a revolutionary part of print culture, and one important locus in which provenance was established in the first place, and within a provenance-producing and provenance-inventing institution, namely the auction house. What you see here to the left is my oldest catalogue from 1747, a demolition auction over one of the most opulent houses in the English Baroque, performed on the premises by the pioneering Georgian London auctioneer Christopher Cook. And to the right, a quite recent catalogue offering a house designed by Paul Rudolph, built in Florida in 1953 and sold at Sotheby's in New York in in 2019, and it re-entered the market only 3 weeks ago. James Bridges, the first Duke of Chandos, had one of the most lavish houses in England built, designed by some of the finest English architects of the time, with the help of artists and artisans from across Europe. In 1747, 24 years only after the house was completed, it was auctioned for demolition by his son Henry, the second Duke, who inherited his father's debt. A substantial part of the family's fortune was lost in the South Sea bubble crash in 1720. During a 12-day sale, followed by the skilled work of so-called housebreakers, the house was torn into pieces, from mundane but excellent building materials to spectacular architectural features, and I'm following some of its components across a whirlwind of auctions across 250 years. The Rudolph House, built on Sanibel Island in Florida of the Gulf of Mexico in 1953, has been sitting in 2 crates, wrapped in heavy industrial protective plastic in California, since it sold at Sotheby's in 2019. And to the right, I'm throwing in another quite recent catalogue, a house sold at Bonhams, London in 2021, from a series of the 6 times 6 meters prefabricated refugee houses that Jean Prouvé designed in 1944 for the victims of carpet bombing in the eastern parts of France. Many of them are today upgraded to 6-star hotel rooms by star architects such as Jean Nouvel and Richard Rogers during the last decade. They presently proliferate as follies to sit in the parks and the gardens of the super-rich across continents. So this book is on how architecture moves, actually, factually, and across media, and on stasis as well as on movement. Oddly, architecture sold in auction often ends up in storage. There are lots of warehouses in this book and also lots of restitution claims. But let me take a step back and talk a little bit about provenance proper. By defining provenance to explain what we are doing in Provenance Projected when transplanting an 18th century concept into architecture, something that has strangely never been done. I can imagine that concepts such as authenticity and originality may figure center stage in what you are discussing in this course series. These are also values that resist conventional definitions and associations in Provenance Projected. That is certainly the case with the material I'm working on in my auction book. The grant that we won is for so-called basic research. This is highly competitive money, as you may know. Basic research is about to become an extinct species in academia across disciplines. Basic research, which doesn't really have a better word in English, I believe, is curiosity-driven, speculative. It's about new ideas, about new principles, about theories. Its purpose is not first and foremost to be directly applied, in the sense that the sponsors get something back that can be easily implemented or commodified. Nonetheless, we have a lot of practitioners involved, way more than most research projects of this kind. Architects, preservationists, and artists, and a huge teaching portfolio of master studios and seminars, and of course PhD students and postdoc fellows. In the face of the climate crisis, architectural education needs radical reform. Future generations of architects will be working with repurposing the existing building stock, from distinguished buildings to the discrete and the mundane, from architecture to the building industry. And as an architectural historian, I am not shy to claim that clearly architectural history has never been more important in the history of architectural history. Architects need to better understand the provenance of actual buildings. the buildings they are working on, the buildings they are working with, and that, of course, includes their archives. So the basic research aspect here is that the whole project, with all its different facets and personal obsessions, hinges simply on the transposition of one concept into a new field. The concept provenance, from Latin provenire, to come from, was coined in the last parts of the 18th century to describe the ownership, the authorship, and the whereabouts of precious objects such as artworks, books, manuscripts, ethnographica, and archaeological artifacts, things that moves around more easily and in more obvious ways than architecture does. The driest possible definition of provenance is that it records the ownership history of culturally valuable objects. There are four specific historical circumstances, I believe, for the emergence of the concept of provenance at that very moment in time, in the latter parts of the 18th century, when objects started to circulating the globe on an unprecedented scale. First, the establishment of archaeology as a proto, at least, scientific academic discipline, the unearthing of antiquities from the ground, entering collections, and not least the market. Where did these things come from? Were they legally excavated, exported, collected, sold, etc.? Then, second, the invention of the arts market, when artists were no longer necessarily commissioned to produce site-specific works, but made works for an anonymous market administered by art dealers, auction houses, etc. An anonymous market made the biography of artworks more elusive. Who made the piece, when, where, who bought it, where has it been exhibited, hidden, stolen, forged, lost, found, etc. Ownership records became critical, as well as the recording of objects' itineraries through collections and museums. Thirdly, and importantly, colonialism and empire, the enormous displacement of people through the slave trade, wars, and colonized territories, but also the massive displacement of objects, which was always part of the colonial project. And then these three may be summed up in a fourth overarching institution and archaeological typology, the public museum established in the late 18th century, originally a European Enlightenment project, today in deep crisis. Museums have become battlefields of interests, and one dichotomy is made of a so-called tribal standpoint, the idea that things should be returned to their place of origins, and a universalistic standpoint based on the idea of the encyclopedic museum and modern constructions of mankind, shared heritage, and so forth. One major field for provenance research and restitution claims regards the looting of antiquities in the age of colonialism. The Parthenon, for instance, and the so-called Benin bronzes are among the most famous of these claims. Okay, so these processes, politics, and institutions caused an emergency in 18th century Europe to understanding where an object came from, who owned it, were these things legitimately owned as they moved around across continents, markets, possessors, and institutions. Words such as authentication, attribution, authenticity, authorship, copyright, dispossession, displacement, expropriation, heritage, ownership, preservation, provenience, restitution, restoration, sourcing, spolia, vandalism, and many others became part of discourses that tried to describe the origins, movements, legitimacy, status, destination, and whereabouts of objects. Such words obviously has everything to do with architecture as well. All of them and many others are defined in this book, launched at the Warburg Institute a few months ago in London, Erik and Adam among the 60 contributors. It's published with Hatje Kantz in Berlin. Ove Fleckner and myself are the editors, and it presents 101 entries that conceptualizes, theorizes, historicizes, and projects provenance in architecture from acquisition to will. Provenance has to do with documenting the facts that helps understand the lives of objects, the pedigree of objects, the biography of objects, and the changing value of objects, historically, locally, and globally. Provenance research comes to the forefront when there is doubt that things are, for instance, forged or stolen, when their legal status is dubious. Today, at least, the ideal is that nothing of importance should change hands without presenting the full ownership record of an art object. When it is found, when it is sold, bought, collected, etc., provenance records these transactions of precious objects in the market and elsewhere. And that is why museums increasingly, if they have resources to do so and if they have the will to do so, are establishing provenance departments. The Metropolitan in New York recently hired a head of provenance after the model of the Louvre in Paris. And the question is, of course, if these museum departments work to document the provenance of their holding, or if it is also a way of lawyering up. Another field, crux to provenance research that regularly engage larger audiences is restitution claims on artworks and property looted during the Third Reich and the Holocaust and the Nazi regime's confiscation of Jewish citizens' arts and possessions. Sometimes, when very valuable paintings are restituted to their heirs of the owners, they end up in auction. What you see here to the left is Gustav Klimt's portraits of Elizabeth Lederer. It's from 1915-16. Here it is in Vienna with Elizabeth's mother, Serena, who was also painted by Klimt earlier, painting in the middle. The painting was seized by the Nazis in 1938. After the war, it was restituted to Elizabeth's brother, who sold it to an art dealer in the 1980s, who passed it on, sold it to Leonard Lauder. What you see to the right is the painting hammered down in November last year at Sotheby's in New York, setting a record price for modern paintings sold in auction. And this specific sale leads to another dimension of provenance, architectural provenance, that has to do with the building in which this painting was sold. June 1st, 2023, Sotheby's bought what was originally the Whitney Museum of American Art, designed by Marcel Breuer and inaugurated on Madison Avenue in Manhattan, 1966, a modern brutalist monument. Here you see, this is a few moments before the Lauder sale, November 18th, last fall. Here you see Marcel Breuer's famous concrete ceiling over what is now a sale room. When Sotheby announced the acquisition of its new American flagship, its chief executive said, I'm quoting, "We often refer to the provenance of artworks, and in the case of the Breuer, there is no history richer than the museum that has housed the Whitney, Metropolitan, and Frick collections." I haven't, but I will count how many times the auctioneer said "at the Breuer" while selling the Klimt. It must have been at least 20 times during 20 minutes. Sotheby's paid $100 million for the building, but what they bought was really priceless. This sale shows how provenance sometimes become a currency in its own right. They bought the history of the Whitney, but also of the Met and the Frick. The Metropolitan leased the building when the Whitney moved down to the meatpacking district in 2016 and renamed it the Met Breuer. Then the Frick collection sublet the building from the Met, while its 1914 Gilded Age mansion on Fifth Avenue underwent renovation During those years, it was renamed Frick Madison. This intense trajectory of transactions and the rapid changes of names not only display how architecture may move while sitting perfectly still, or how real estate value activates other sets of values. Upon signing the contract, Sotheby's marveled on the rare opportunity to buy an iconic museum in any major city. The change in program from showing art to selling art, quoting again, reverberated with a lot of sellers being able to display their collections in museum-style settings, which is really unique, as the Sotheby's vice president recently assured when summing up a record-breaking first season in this iconic building. We could talk about what you see here as a transformation project, but there are more subtle aspects in play in the transformation from a museum to an auction house than the physical architectural dimension. Here you see the Whitney, the Met Breuer, and Frick Madison, and at the bottom, Sotheby's New York, or as they prefer, the Breuer. The latter refurbished by Herzog de Meuron, who also now gets to add their names to co-author a modern monument. This all adds up to an interesting authorship complex that has everything to do with provenance. The change of names, the banners, the change in function, the change in value, and the prestige that comes into this hyper-pedigreed architectural object is something that everyone involved capitalizes on in the conflation of real estate and high culture. Living and dead collectors want to sell their arts and collections in museum surroundings and have the previews in something that feels like a museum. Provenance and provenance research is an enormous field. Here you see a couple of important books, good books. Architecture is not mentioned with a word. This is Mark Zuckerberg implying that provenance is not important. Whether the news you read and like are fake or factual is of no consequence. To us, however, it matters where both the news and buildings and the materials that they are made of come from, and not least and even more where they are heading. I said that Provenance Projected totally hinges on a conceptual translocation. So this is what we do. It's brilliantly simple, and it's based on the premises of instability, as we are fully aware that any cut into time will show architecture performing in all sorts of states between complex origins and uncertain destinations. So what we do is first to take provenance up in scale to something as big as buildings, even to landscapes and infrastructures. Secondly, and very differently from provenance proper, we apply provenance on something that apparently sits still, as buildings are often mistakenly believed to do. Obviously, building elements and even buildings move, and architecture moves in many, both obvious and surprising ways. We are, however, also interested in buildings in situ, in their fixedness, their construction, their materials, with their often very different life expectancy, and we're interested in their future possibilities. Here, questions of migration, of transference, and of circulation must be answered on a different plane. The Breuer in New York is one example, as is basically all of my auctions, and this insight is explored across a lot of different individual projects within the framework of Provenance Projected. Thirdly, and most radically, and implied in the epithet projected, we recharge the temporality of the concept, which has so far been employed to describe precious objects retrospectively, from presumed origins to the present. But architecture is all about change, And we suggest that provenance in architecture may have a forward-bound dimension and be discussed as a dynamic process, even as a creative instrument applicable to understanding lost, present, and future potentials of buildings by engaging also complex social trajectories of architectural work. Our interest in historical inheritance and transformative development enables what could perhaps be termed even strategic provenance, something that can be recognized, cultivated, planned for, redirected, refined, and recycled. Across time and place, we contemplate buildings and architectural artifacts emerging as composite, unruly, unpredictable, and not least as multi-temporal entities. Core to the project is, as mentioned, that we are as interested in where things may be heading as in where they come from. So this is us, 20 plus people. We meet every semester in a different city, depending on where our different partners are and what they're doing. So we're traveling around a bit. We have had a quite eruptive public last semester in now in the fall. First, Erik and I, together with Jorge Otero Pailos at Columbia University, he's there, the director of the preservation program, organized the last year's so-called Fitch Symposium, where we invited architects, art and architectural historians, artists, museum directors, even 2 choirs to examine what we called fragments of the imagination, provenance, preservation, and the afterlife of architecture. Then we organized at the Warburg Institute in London, where I was a fellow last year, our main international conference called simply Architectural Provenance. And here we had 8 art and architectural historians simply thinking with architectural provenance across time, place, and material. And besides the dictionary I showed a couple of slides ago, we also just now recently launched this special double issue of the journal Future Interior on provenance in architecture, 12-14 articles. So this is now out in print and on JSTOR and elsewhere. And then I believe Erik will mention we've made a couple of exhibitions and we will make a couple of more exhibitions. But then I think I'll simply pass on the word to Erik.
Okay. Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. I will continue Mari's talk, mainly focusing on how to operationalize these ideas we have developed during the last years, and also focusing on the digital database we have been developing. But first, our starting point and my role in this project is both as a practitioner, but also running preservation studios at the Oslo School of Architecture. So we have been for several years working with kind of recent heritage, concrete buildings, kind of the recent past that really is questioning differently how we can deal with architectural objects, architectural components, etc. So we have been working quite for a long time with research and teaching into this kind of current heritage. We are, of course, facing a completely different reality. The students need to be instructed in different ways. We have to develop our curriculum quite differently, and we have to ask different questions. And of course, we are dealing with, both in practice and teaching, with an enormous amount of materials, components, and products that needs to be accounted for and need to be both ethically and practically needs to be handled. What we are kind of dealing with is, of course, the problem of masses of information, both documents, digital documents, physical documents, and of course also building products and elements. So this is just a screenshot of my own computer dealing with materials, dealing with documents. And of course, this is still the way we organize information. We store information in files, in folders in our computers. And as you all know, these files are dying in the depth of our computers. So they are very hard to retain, they're hard to search. And each one of us have our own small archives, very hard to compare and to share. So this idea that we are dealing with a big problem with big data, big problem with handling documents and information is something that is hit architectural practice very hard, especially when dealing with reuse. Of course, the architectural profession is also very much colliding with the new way of working with the existing buildings. And the professions, the different consultants, and the way we construct architecture needs to be reconsidered. So the silo thinking in architecture or in the building practice, the building industry, is quite inefficient when dealing with existing buildings. So this kind of idea of a hierarchy of information and hierarchy of management goes very well together in this sort of new situation. So how to deal with that? We were facing, I'm also a practicing architect, working in a practical project, the former US Embassy in Oslo, designed by Eero Saarinen, the American architect, American-Finnish architect. This is, of course, could be any reuse project. What we were facing here was an enormous amount of documents from the embassy, from historical archives, from the municipality, etc. So we were faced with an avalanche of information and dealing with our folder structure. Luckily, we found a company sitting in Oslo at that time called Bengler, who had developed a new way of dealing with information sharing with a CMS system. And we were contacting them. They had just recently finished the web page of AOA. And you might have all looked into this, but the basic idea here is that AOA, the architectural firm, had digitized all their archives, so they could they had to find a solution for sharing and systematizing their documents, their projects. And the Norwegian Bengler was able to do that with a content management system that allowed for sharing and building up this web page. I will not go into the web page, you can go do that yourself. So basically, it's a searchable system. You tag all your documents, and the tagging makes it searchable. It's very, very easy, no mystery. And of course, the idea that you have a database that is disconnected from the output, disconnected from the web page, so you can build up different mediums. For example, you can make a web page, you can make a presentation, book, etc., etc. So basically, a way of systematizing a lot of data, visual data. Now they moved to the US and are really big, grown a big company, and they're called Sanity now. The web page is also Sanity, offering a free system of building up databases, basically. And of course, they charge after a while while you're building your system. So at the embassy, we were able to use, in a very simple way, use this technology to build up an archive of thousands of documents, and basically letting these documents appear on the same level with no hierarchy. And making them searchable in the sense that you could search by floors, you could search by medium, you could search by elements, and you can search by all kinds of different types of information you put in. The tags, of course, you constructed. So this allowed us to really make a system that not only for us, the architects and the consultants, could be used while we were constructing and planning the building, but could also be used on site on your mobile phone. The builders were able to access these photographs to actually do monitoring while construction. And of course, it constructs a history of the building at the same time. We took this experience from practice and from this fantastic project into the school, because we were when we gradually started, or gradually we're dealing with buildings with large archives, and also buildings that needed to be scrutinized and visited on site. We needed a system that a shareable system that could work at the same way. So what we did was to construct, in collaboration with the programmer, construct this database that now acts as our Provenance database that collects materials, collects photographs, documents, all kinds of things collected by the students and by faculty, so we can find and we can sort of cross information across different buildings, across different projects. So the idea here is to really have students' projects entered into the database, so the students were there. We make collections by materials, or here we have collected all Sverre Fem's materials. You can of course then tag and search by drawing or by other means. And we of course have a large set of buildings, mainly in Oslo. And these buildings can be searched by age, by materials, by status, listing status, by construction methods, etc. And also we have components, so all the buildings components searchable by decades, by materials, by their condition, and also by their recyclability. So the idea here is to build up an archive of components that really could be used as a way of actually dealing with reuse of materials. And of course, all the materials are really, all the documents are really searchable. So we can search by decade, and here you see one of our PhD students with his interest in runes. Or you can search by decades. So here is the 1930s and all the documents the students have excavated from different buildings. So here you see the variety of documents, from ads to letters to photographs to drawings to all kinds of things. So basically here you would see the decade, so to say, in one glimpse. And if you enter into one of them, you could also then go and go further into one building. And here you see the different authors in the building, the different producer and the people who supply to the building. We also then can track the alteration history of the building and the provenance of the building. And we also then can assemble everything related to that building in this same database. And here you also see the kind of the nature of the material. Something is scanned, something is photographed, and something is high res. Our main interest has been products, and this was part of the fall studio. So we have been looking into not only the building materials, but also the equipment, the lighting, everything that relates to it. And if we start to enter into the history of the providers, you also see where they also have entered. Here is a glacier, tagging a glacier here. You can see he is delivered to several projects. So you can move into this. And this was one project and one building that we dealt with last year, Henny Onsdag Art Center at the outside of Oslo, and also the ground for my research doing now with a book coming out in a few years. So here you can see a building from 1968 with the variations of materials, furniture, and documents relating to this. So this allows us, also externally, people to enter into kind of a search for the provenance of this building, and really widening out the idea of the building as a kind of a fixed, coherent entity, but really connecting it to all kinds of production histories, to all kinds of ways of working. So these two last buildings ended up being semester studies, and also ending up as two exhibitions held in these two institutions. So this is a very brief introduction to the archive, and also the way of working with different outputs. This way of using a database and handling documents and data has allowed us to rethink how we conduct preservation. We are still in our profession, still of course focusing quite a lot on the monuments and the buildings and the kind of coherency of heritage. Looking into the kind of all the bits and pieces and all the enormous amount of information really makes us rethink what both a building is, and also how we should maintain the building in the future. How building materials enter buildings and how they leave buildings, how they change over time, and also how they're being documented. So this database has made us think differently, both in practice, I must say. We are using this as a very active tool now when we are doing preservation work. And in this context, very importantly, how students relate to archives and how they relate to documents and building parts. I think I'll stop there, and we can take questions regarding both me and Mari's talk.
Thank you very much. Both very interesting takes on the topic. Somebody's asking for the link to the archive website, and
I can share a link that is limited amount of documents because of copyright issues. We cannot allow all of these things, but I can share that in the chat.
That was exactly related to my question, where the original sources are taken from. I imagine from various other archives in the world, and libraries and collections, and how you deal with rights.
Yeah, that's a big question. Of course, we have negotiated with Norwegian archives and Norwegian museums, etc. So we have we have, but you have to negotiate with everyone, each of one. So it's quite a challenge, of course, to make this happen.
Usually this kind of material, is it, I know that is a very generic question, but this kind of material were already available somehow or not?
Some of it is digitally available, but we don't want to replicate other archives. But a lot of it is paper archives, never scanned before. So, for example, the book me and Mari made with the Sverigefinsk Nordic Pavilion in Venice, there are thousands of documents never seen. So this is of course a treasure for the research on that particular building and that particular architect. So that's of course sometimes extremely valuable.
Yes. Like another question: if you use AI for translating the web pages or the documents themselves?
No, but we have been discussing it with the programmer to use, because of course you could use soon, or hopefully not, use AI to search into and of course harvest documents. And there are of course many companies and providers of for example real estate people that harvest publicly available information, so they could sort of make data sets of for example the property. But a lot of these archives are not available, but you could absolutely make this AI do this more efficiently in some ways or another. But we haven't looked into that, no.
Thank you. While waiting for maybe some more questions, or so Adam and Ferdinand wants to comment something. I find it very interesting reading on the dictionary that Mary quoted before on the term of photography. She mentioned the an architecture as a 3D palimpsest. And I find it as a very very clear image of what an architecture can be. And now watching the archive that you were presenting, and all the pictures and all the tagging and categorizing every element by, for example, the material or the function, for example, a lamp. I find it very in dialogue with the idea of palimpsest as a stratification of information, and in fact, this is what an architecture is, and how we should read it.
Well, that's a fun comment now, as Erik and I are planning precisely that entry on photography, which is on a demolition auctioneer in Oslo, demolishing buildings from the 1880s until 1915 or so. He photographed every building he demolished the night before he demolished it, putting himself in the photo with his hat and his cane to provide scale. And we are planning on running a studio in the spring, next spring, rematerializing through the city of Oslo everything he demolished to find the site and what is there now and what was there then, and doing a kind of a 3D version of his work in reverse, sort of. And what he did is, of course, a kind of, this has never been, it's completely fallen under the radar, both him and his incredible collection of photographs, which are in the municipality museum of Oslo, the Oslo Museum. And it's really, had this happened in Berlin or in Paris, it would have been, I'm sure, famous. It's like very much like Aché's photos of Paris, what he's doing. The kind of, empty city with one man and a building that is literally about to disappear. So this is something both of us will turn to full force very soon, and I think that will be incredibly fun.
Brilliant. Yeah, I do believe in the same. You were referring to Richard Anderson, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I find it very inspiring history, the one that you described. And are the pictures or his documents and picture available to the public right now or not?
I'm getting a little bit worried as all of this is now being recorded. Yeah.
Well, work in progress.
Yes.
Thank you very much. If for the time being there are no new questions, I will leave the floor maybe to Adam Lowe for the next class.
Thank you very much, Costanza. Mary and Erik, thank you for those two presentations. I'd probably just like to say at the beginning that part of the Provenance Projected that focused on the Henny Onstad brought in discussions about Kurt Schwitter's and particularly Schwitter's work in Norway, in Hertøya, and also a focus on the work that he did, his last MERS barn installation up in the Lake District in England. And that's one of the overlaps where Mary and Erik's work links to what Factum's doing. I mean, of course, another very obvious one, which wasn't mentioned in the presentations, is that the next Provenance Projected event will be taking place in Oulu. Oulu is this year's European City of Culture, and the Aaltosiilo, built by Alvar and Aino Aalto, is one of the projects, in fact, where the EU Mies Awards was presented from last week. And it's really been center stage in not only the whole debate about architectural provenance and preservation and concrete buildings. It has many elements that run along with the themes of Provenance Projected, but also because of its location. So the Aaltosiilo is in Meritopila, which it used to be a cellulose wood chip silo as part of a cellulose factory. But recently, there's been an extraordinary focus on the edge of the Arctic Circle because of the amount of change that's happening there and the political global interest in the climate changes that are happening in that zone. So I think anyone who's interested in the Provenance Projected, please keep an eye on the Aaltosiilo at the beginning of September, when there will be an exhibition accompanying the Provenance Projected event. So now I'm going to slightly switch the focus to introduce the main subject that Factum's been working on in Nigeria. But I want to do it by thinking about one of the first projects that Factum carried out, an early one in 2006, so it's now 20 years ago, which was a repatriation project of a kind. So in Venice, on the island of San Giorgio Maggiore, which is part of the Cini Foundation and which really led to the creation of the archive, the Center for the Analysis and Recording of Cultural Heritage in Venice, and also the Archive Online Academy, which is what this talk is a part of. But effectively, Napoleon's troops moved in and removed Veronese's great painting, which occupied the whole end wall of Palladio's refectory on the island. I mean, it's one of the great examples of a work of art and its character and its meaning and presumably its aura being embedded in a specific place at a specific time. And the removal of the painting and its transport to the Louvre, where it becomes the largest painting in the new collection at that time. So this is in the end of the 18th century, and it was made public at the beginning of the 19th in 1810. But for many, many years, the painting was seen like you see now on the screen. So it wasn't as it was intended. It wasn't in dialogue with the building. It wasn't with a very specific time of day as the light comes in from the right-hand side and illuminates the left-hand side of the painting. But it was taken out and it was hung in a gallery at the wrong height, well, at a height that it was never intended for, with a zenithal light inside a heavy gold frame and between two doors. And so when we put the facsimile of this painting, which was recorded over several weeks in the Louvre, back into the refectory, it raised a lot of questions about the relationship between originality, because no one questions that the painting here in the Louvre is the original version, although very heavily restored, because when it was ripped off the wall in 7 strips, it had to be heavily retouched. It lost a lot of the paint. It was then has a complex restoration history in the mid-19th century and in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when different aspects of the painting change. So I think just to introduce it as a thought, originality is not a fixed state. It's definitely a process. And you know that when you look in the mirror, so we all change all the time. But this painting has gone through a lot of changes. And I like this slide that's here at the moment, because if you look at the 2 doors on either side, look at the way people are looking. There's a whole sense that there's a bench in front. This painting was meant to be considered over a long period of time. It wasn't something that was meant to be viewed for a second. It was designed so the monks every day would eat in front of it. And it's probably the most complex composition in the whole of the Western canon that keeps inviting you to look and question and think. So the aim of this painting is a complex painting to make you think. Let's have the next one. So when you go to the Louvre now, this is basically the way you see the painting. It hangs in the same room as the Mona Lisa. And if you basically look to the left-hand side of the gold frame, you can see the whole character of the room has changed. The opening is no longer a doorway. It's been made bigger to allow larger numbers of people to flow through this space. And around 9 million people a year stand, mainly with their backs to the Veronese, to get a glimpse of the Mona Lisa. The ones who are facing the Veronese painting are almost all taking selfies with the Mona Lisa in the background. So I think the difference between the idea of a monk looking at this painting every day and thinking and reflecting and meditating and engaging on it, and the way it's being viewed now, raises a lot of questions about whether the museum is still, in a way, acting as a home for the muse, or whether it's really become a container for trophies that vie with each other for celebrity. So whether we're looking at at artifacts, paintings, objects within the museum, or whether they're becoming more like relics. So I'd love to think about this whole relationship between the way an object changes its nature. So when we put the Veronese facsimile into the refectory, obviously it was something that I was very nervous about. I think the whole team at Factum were. I mean, it's a 10 by 7 meter painting. And in Venice, nobody wants the whole of Venice to be filled with facsimiles. But there was an extraordinarily emotional reaction when it was returned. And the Italian media a lot of the art historical press, a lot of the television commentators started talking about the facsimile in its intended location being more authentic than the experience of seeing the original painting in the Louvre. And I think this question of authenticity and originality shifting their status and their role is something that I'm going to muse on a little bit over the next 10 or 15 minutes. Next slide. So, I mean, I like thinking that the Mona Lisa is actually not the most visited or viewed painting in the world. The most visited or viewed painting in the world is a painting that's meant to have been made without contact of human hand, and that hangs in a pilgrimage site. It's the Virgin of Guadalupe, at approximately 20 million visitors, so twice as many as the number of visitors who go to see the Mona Lisa, go to visit and pay respect to the Virgin of Guadalupe. And there they have a system of 3 conveyor belts that carry people past. So the pilgrims who go to experience this painting. And I think the question of how you look, how you experience, what you bring to a painting and what you take away is critically important. The next slide. So in the Louvre now, and this was a picture taken a few months ago, you see almost all the crowd looking at the picture, not with their eyes, but through their mobile phones. And I think here, I would probably argue that it's not the original, but it's a copy 4 times removed that you're actually looking at. So the original is behind 2 layers of glass. It's then behind a barrier. Then it's embedded within the screen of your mobile phone. And in most cases, as you can see here, the actual painting is really just a few pixels in size. So I think the question I'd like to raise here is, what is it that people are actually looking for or looking at? Because of course, they've paid significant money to go to see the Mona Lisa. So the engagement with the painting is very important. And in people's minds, the engagement with an original painting, even in a difficult way, is something that is a meaningful experience. But you take away a small picture in a screen, in a mobile phone, and then you probably look at it as a reproduction within a book. And I think this is where I'd like to try and now raise a few questions, because something very strange is taking place. In the 25 years that Factum has been focused on high resolution recording in 3 dimensions and color, originally we were criticized a lot that a virtual experience can never match the experience of seeing an original. But I would present that through a picture like this one, the experience of seeing an original is increasingly removed and increasingly abstracted, and is missing the very important qualities of an object, the material qualities of an object, which we can now capture. So next one, the next is a short video. And it's a short video of someone. It's quite disorientating, because you're this is actually in a VR environment with a Finnish headset called a Vario. You're in the tomb of Seti I, and the data was recorded this data was probably recorded in 2016, but it's similar to the data we recorded in 2009. And the Vario is controlled by your eye movements. So what you're seeing here is someone inside the VR looking, and you're looking where they're looking. I mean, that's always a very tricky experience, because you don't have the same thought. So following someone else's eye movements doesn't give you the experience. But the question of looking, the question of being able to zoom right in, the question of intimate access that's made possible through a virtual system like the Vario headset, is actually getting closer and closer to the privileged access you used to be able to have when you go into an environment and you can go right up to the walls, you could look very closely. And I want to show you in a few slides the technologies that are being developed now. So next one, that are being developed now to look at paintings, drawings, and other works of art. This is a Raphael drawing that's in the Ashmolean, and it was recorded with the Selene system that can take you right in and show you the surface. So we removed the color, and underneath the color of the drawing on the surface of the paper is a series of incise notations that were made before the drawing was inked and colored. So actually, through this recording in 3D and color, we're able to do what I used to be able to do as a student by going into the Ashmolean and into the drawing room and looking at drawings. They were mounted, but you could handle them. And for all of the time I've been involved in trying to bring images into bringing oneself into an intimate engagement with an image, this obsession, the obsession with showing both surface and relief and color and different qualities that are embedded in that materiality, has been the core mission of Factum. Can we have the next one? So here you've got a page from an 11th century manuscript, probably made in Cairo, that's in the Bodleian, that was recorded by John Barrett, who's going to be talking in the next session about the work that's being done at Archaeogs, so the sort of sister organization to Archive. Next slide. And actually, what we've been trying to do here is really handle things in 3 dimensions. So this is actually an exercise that was done with the conservation department, but where the recording is literally being handled. I mean, in this case, I'm not handling it, it's a video of it being handled. But I'll show you in a second. Actually, we're finding a way now that you can do this with any object if you have the right recording in a digital space without any special software. And I think this is starting to be a game changer. So both for conservators who can study this work and talk about paint loss, next one, but also for people who really want to get an intimate engagement with an object. So here you have a nature print by Aaltosiilo, and this was an experiment we were running in the studio with a new software designed by Jorge Cano. So the little black squares you see are to do with the packaging of the data. So in order to keep the data light, we're streaming the data in certain ways. But this Jorge is handling in real time. And I think once you can handle data in a digital space, then we need to rethink dramatically about this relationship between originality and authenticity, and particularly what you need to study. Because obviously here, this is a very different engagement with an object than the kind of engagement that people are having with the Mona Lisa in the Louvre. So it's not to say that one engagement is better or worse, but I would say one engagement leads to an intimate understanding of an object, and the other engagement leads to an engagement with an object that is much more of a bucket list type. So been there, done that. And works of art tend to reveal themselves more slowly, and they tend to reveal themselves the more you look in subtle ways, in complex ways, and with time. So the important thing here is you can handle this data in your own space at any time. Next one. And as you saw in that last image, the secret is finding an intuitive way to handle the data and change the lighting. So if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see Tiffany, who's demonstrating now the new IIIF compliant software for relighting and changing the lighting on an image. This is a small copper plate that you're probably looking at 4 or 5 times, maybe more magnification right now. And I think this kind of manual engagement, where you're using both your hand movements and a keypad to show the object, is important. Next one. So the kind of thing you can look at is really the surface. So this is another engraving. And you can start to measure, you can start to be scientific, you can start to actually understand how the marks were made and what tools were used and how they displaced the copper and what the artist was doing manually. And this kind of work is leading to discoveries all the time at the moment. So last year there was a big publication coming out of Archeox about the discovery of William Blake's first engraved lines. And for me, when technology can give this kind of access to reevaluate, I think we're in a very exciting time. And one of the questions asked about AI, so next slide, one of the projects we've been running for many, many years is taking this kind of data that's full of pattern recognition or information that can be extracted by pattern recognition software and applying that to a study of the artist hand. So there's a major paper which we can probably circulate a link to, but it'll be on Factum's website anyway, published by Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland with myself and Carlos Bayard and others participating, looking at El Greco's paintings and seeing whether we can identify the hands of El Greco and his followers through pattern recognition, so computer vision and AI analysis of paintings and extracting the data from those paintings. So I'm now just going to lead into Ferdy's talk by introducing a few case studies we've done. Next one. So one of the very first jobs of Factum in 2001 was to make a facsimile of the Dama Delce. This is the facsimile of the Dama Delce, who's in the Museo Arqueológico Nacional in Madrid, but was originally found in Elche. And in this case, the MARC, the Museum of Archaeology in Alicante, wanted the original back. So not all issues of repatriation have to cross national boundaries. Next one. And we also were asked with the Fondazione Giorgio Cini back in 2009 by the town of Caravaggio to bring Caravaggio's great paintings together in a research center in the town that bears his name. I mean, what's actually an irony here is that while the town bears Caravaggio's name, and Caravaggio is known as Caravaggio because he said he's from Caravaggio. He actually was almost certainly from Milan, and needed to have a little bit of disinformation to throw people off his scent. But we did create a center for the close study and relighting of paintings in the town of Caravaggio. Sadly, because of politics, it's no longer open, but Factum is still working with Caravaggio and recording Caravaggio paintings and putting together the data that's needed, and hopefully again an in-depth research center, whether online or based on physical facsimiles, is possible. Next one. I mean, we worked with the most recently discovered Caravaggio, which is now on display in the Prado. And this is a great study. It's what I really enjoy doing, when you can record a painting when it's before its restoration, during its restoration, and after its restoration. And in this case, it wasn't a Caravaggio when it came up for auction a few years ago. and then it was authenticated, and now it is a Caravaggio. So paintings get attributed and de-attributed based on current scholarship, and it's not absolute, nor is it objective. This one has amazing provenance. So most of the attribution is based on knowing the provenance of the painting. Next one. You also have paintings that are changing all the time. So on the left-hand side is a painting from Utrecht, and its blue-green background was applied in the 17th or 18th century. And the conservators were about to do a restoration, but it was decided to follow a conservation practice that didn't remove additions of paint. So we were asked to revisualize the painting, to make an exact facsimile with the relief and the surface without the background color. And the minute you do that, the painting changes. Spatially, it changes. The angels catching the blood become a dominant subject. And these very dominant halos around the two figures become less present than they are in the current version. Next. I'm also fascinated by paintings that were made to be seen as altarpieces or polyptychs, so made to be seen together as an installation, which gets split up. And the Politico Grafoni is perhaps one of the best examples we worked on, where we gradually recorded 16 of the panels in 9 different museums around the world and brought them back together. And once we'd done that, next slide, please. Once we'd done that, the city of Bologna was able to organize an exhibition where they showed the facsimiles in their combined configuration, and the next one, and the original paintings in another room, uncombined. And I think here again, like with the Veronese, it forces a discussion about how pictures change, because here the pictures had been restored at different museums in different times and have very different qualities one from another, and yet all belong together. And so I think there's a great focus looking at this exhibition as you went from room to room, actually understanding where the aura, if I don't want to use that word, but I will, where the aura of each picture might lie, and whether it lies embedded within the individual elements, or whether it actually lies in the whole assemblage, especially when seen in the right place. So bringing this picture back to Bologna, or these pictures back to Bologna, was very important. So next, so to wrap up, I think one of my favorite examples of things that question the nature of authentic and original experience was the work we were asked to do by the Wauja community in Upper Xingu to record the rock-cut inscriptions on the sacred cave of Kabakawaka. And this is a photograph from before the vandalism, where the cave was being used as a teaching tool for the local communities. It's quite a trek to where it is, and the cave is actually outside of the protected zone within which the Wauja and other indigenous communities live. Next, when we went to record it, Akari Wauja was the first there, and when he got there, the cave had been completely vandalized, and all of the rock-cut inscriptions had been hacked off. And Ferdy was there with Arthur Pryor, and they recorded the whole site incredibly well. Next one, please. And over a period of about 2 years, working from historical photographs, drawings, and especially with the knowledge of the local communities, we were able to do a digital restoration that restored all of the petroglyphs. And next one. and enables the facsimile of the tomb to be back in the local community and again used as a teaching tool for the carrying on indigenous knowledge, the local knowledge. And what I love here, can I have the next slide, please? What I love here is that Shirley Kronak, who was one of the indigenous group people we were working with, gave a very beautiful talk in Madrid about the fact that the facsimile has now become the authentic voice and the object that carries the living information that the communities learn from, while the vandalized cave, which still sits in its original location just outside the reservation, the preserved land, is now a relic and a sign of the artificiality of the world that's being imposed upon them. And I think that's the point where I'd really like, there's one more slide you can bring up, Costanza, but that's where I'd really like now to hand over to Ferdy, because Ferdy basically has been working on all of Factum's projects in Africa, particularly with the Bakor Monoliths and more recently with the Igbo-Ukwu artifacts, to raise questions about how they can be preserved, how they can be shared, how they can be repatriated, both as meaningful copies and as original objects. So Ferdy, over to you.
Well, I think the segue I would start with is that Kamakwaka, the engravings are about storytelling. It's telling the story of that community in an artwork through those petroglyphs. And I think in terms of what Factum does, storytelling is really central to everything. In terms of bringing out the biography of an artwork, it's layers of history, how it's transformed over time. And I think being sensitive to those individual histories is really essential to how we approach repatriation. Because really, if you're going to take anything away from my talk, it's that there's no blanket solution. We have to tailor our solutions to the specific cultural context, to the local communities, and to the political realities as well. So as Adam mentioned, I'm going to focus on certainly 2, if I've got time, even 3 projects that we've carried out in Nigeria. First of all, the Bakor Monoliths. Second, the Igbo-Ukwu Bronzes. And third, if we have time, the Benin Bronzes, which Mary mentioned in her talk and which are really emblematic of the repatriation debate in a way that is only rivaled by the Parthenon marbles, but which have a very different set of historical circumstances, which I think should be reflected in how we treat the historical wrongs that led to their dispersal across the world. So I'm going to start in chronological order with the Bakor Monoliths. And perfect, there's my first slide. So Factum first visited Cross River State with the Trust for African Rock Art because of the tireless work of Dr. Abu Solomon Edet. Next slide, please. Formerly of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments Nigeria, but now at the University of Calabar. Abu is a conservation specialist who has championed the cause of the monolith since his first visit, accompanying the anthropologist Keith Nicklin in field work throughout Cross River State in the 1970s. That's Keith on the right. Next slide, please. The monoliths had been surveyed in 1961 and 62 by Philip Allison, an employee of the Nigerian Forestry Commission, who published his research and a selection of photographs in 1968. Allison's survey was in turn commissioned by John Picton, then curator of the Nigerian National Museum in Lagos, now Professor Emeritus of SOAS, and involved purchasing and removing examples for the Lagos Museum. Its timing was significant as it predated both the Nigerian Civil War, which lasted from 1967 to 70, and the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting the illicit import and transfer of ownership of cultural property. Next slide, please. According to Picton, theft was not a problem previously, but during the war and in its aftermath, many sites were looted. The monoliths have also suffered from the association with juju, or black magic, by the many Pentecostalist preachers in the region, contributing to their neglect and even destruction. As in late antiquity, Christianity did not triumph by claiming that the pagan gods did not exist. Instead, they successfully rebranded them as demons. Nigerian Pentecostalism has a comparable relationship with its pre-colonial past, subliminally hybridizing with indigenous forms of worship. It is a simple but critical point that without Alison's documentation, there would be no way of proving when monoliths left the country. You cannot look after something if you do not know what there is to look after, and digital technologies are just the most recent way of gathering and archiving the data. As has unfortunately been discovered by the British Museum, which revealed extensive theft from Charles Townley's collection of gems and cameos that had been in the museum for more than 2 centuries, this is not just an issue specific to the Global South. The team carried out an initial survey in 2016, revealing the extent of the monolith sites and the level of damage sustained. Next slide, please. The villages were once located inside the forest, but many communities relocated to be closer to the new asphalt road when it was paved, leaving monoliths stranded either in patches of remaining forest or in what became farmland. Slash and burn agriculture and the removal of the forest canopy led to the rapid deterioration of the monoliths through exposure to fire and acid rain. Many that remained were fragments, since looted monoliths were often broken up to remove the valuable and easily transportable heads. Next slide, please. On subsequent visits by the US Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation and Karen Foundation, a team enlarged with participants from other Nigerian universities and museums documented around 300 monoliths in over 30 sites, including many never surveyed before. Field work always involved an initial meeting with village chiefs and community members to explain the work, its aims and values, and to employ guides and arrange transportation. Once permission was granted and libations poured, the team would proceed to the sites, some closer to the village and some further afield. Then the monoliths were geolocated, numbered and photographed, and oral history interviews were recorded or filmed. Although time constraints were limited for scanning, particularly impressive and intricately carved examples were 3D scanned using photogrammetry, which you can see here in this slide, a technique by which geometric information is extracted through a comparison of overlapping photographs. Next slide. Photogrammetry's ability to record surface information at a resolution high enough to make a convincing facsimile was relatively new. Prior to this technological development, Factum was reliant on bulkier white light systems, requiring a constant source of power. All of the data was uploaded to a Google Earth map with geolocated sites linked to photographs of the monoliths and links to 3D models, as well as filmed interviews and historical documentation. In agreement with NCMM, photographs and site names were published, but the geolocated map remained private, which is obviously a concern about the risk of facilitating further theft. Alongside the field work, a parallel strand of research investigated looted monoliths. Next slide, please. Alison's archive, which was donated by Picton to the Bodleian Library in Oxford and became available in 2017. It contained many unpublished photographs, enabling the team to investigate the provenance of monoliths internationally. Next slide, please. We identified several that had been in Nigeria in the early 1960s and proceeded to request permission to 3D scan them in collections including the Musée de Quai Branly, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Israel Museum, and the warehouse of Didier Claes. Next slide, please, where we discovered 2 formerly unknown monoliths, one that was photographed by Alison at a site called Oyengi. Factum then produced facsimiles of the monolith at the Cabron Lee, known to its source community as Ebi-Abu, which was acquired by the museum from the dealer Pierre d'Artevelde in 1998 and is now on ICOM's red list of West African cultural objects at risk. Next slide, please. We joined the Metropolitan's top half fragment, the bottom half of which was 3D scanned on site in 2016. Next slide, please. The form was first CNC milled, then silicon molded, cast in resin, and hand colored to match the original. The facsimiles could have been CNC milled directly in basalt, but transportation costs were too great. The facsimiles were then shipped to Nigeria to be featured in the exhibition The Rock Arts of Nigeria, which placed the monoliths in a Nigeria-wide context of other forms of rock art and traveled to several locations, including Lagos, Calabar, Jos, and Zaria. Showcasing them across the country aimed to reinforce a sense of intercommunal cultural unity through this shared form of artistic expression. However, the monoliths are ultimately rooted in a specific community. Therefore, that section of the exhibition remained in Bakor at the Alok Open Air Museum, with facsimiles of the monoliths returned to home communities. Next slide, please. The response to their return was warm, but at the village of Itingi and Tar, where the monolith in the Cabron Lee was looted from, the chief observed that since the spirit of the ancestor Ebi-Abu inhabited the monolith, a facsimile could ultimately not replace the original. Nevertheless, it had deep cultural significance, as can be seen from the masquerade ceremony the community held to welcome its arrival. If that video could play, Costanza. In light of this spiritual dimension, we applied the inverted model to a monolith looted from the village of Ngemetop that ended up in the Chrysler Museum in Norfolk, Virginia. Commendably, the Chrysler decided to repatriate it, and Factum offered to produce a facsimile on behalf of NCMM in recognition of their action, so that the story of the object and its problematic history could continue to be told in the museum. Next slide, please. The exchange of the original for the facsimile was made at the Nigerian Embassy in Washington in 2023. But the question remains as to what should happen to the repatriated monolith. It clearly belonged to the village of Ngemetop, but as an antiquity, NCMM has responsibility for it. Our proposed solution is to balance traditional ownership with federal custodianship by extending the tentative listing by NCMM to comprehend Ngemetop within a UNESCO bid. Until then, the monolith is on display at the National Museum in Calabar. Returning the monolith to its original village does raise the question of security. Is it possible to prevent theft from happening in the future? Round-the-clock guards for 30 different sites, many distant from habitation, are unrealistic. The best, and arguably the only form of protection, are the communities themselves. Communities that love their heritage look after it. Money is, of course, scarce, but a modest financial commitment by NCMM to support them in the preservation of their sites would go a long way. It is hoped that a successful UNESCO bid will encourage this. But what of protection from external forces? Next slide, please. By a strange set of circumstances, we were able to piece together the trafficking routes by which monoliths left the country in an interview with the Cameroonian dealer Njatari Alamdu, who described his engagement in the trade of cultural materials since the 1970s, naming several French and Belgian dealers he had sold to. Next slide, please. He also had several monoliths photographed by Allison in his backyard. The best and perhaps only form of protection from such activity is thorough documentation. As a result of the project, potential international buyers now know that the purchase of a Bakor monolith comes with significant risk, and the value of those already outside the country will have been significantly reduced. Stop the demand and the supply will dry up. So I'm going to now move on to the Igbo-Ukwu Bronzes. If you could move to the next slide. That's another example of one of the monoliths we discovered. So one more, please. It is convenient to assume that simply returning artifacts to museums in their place of origin addresses the problem of access. In Nigeria, a geographic giant with poor infrastructure, repatriation to large cities such as Lagos or Abuja by no means guarantees widespread accessibility. In this part, the issue of how digital technology and the production of facsimiles can enable access to cultural heritage domestically is explored through the example of the extraordinary 9th century Igbo-Ukwu bronzes, discovered in the mid-20th century and excavated by Thurston Shaw. In the decades following the Nigerian Civil War, the Igbo-Ukwu community set out, quote, to use archaeology to benefit themselves economically and to position their ancient past within the history of Nigeria and West Africa, end quote. Central to this project of what they describe as cultural and economic decolonization were the artifacts themselves, the majority of which are held in Lagos, with smaller collections in Ibadan and the British Museum. Community consultation revealed the sense of regret that following the excavation, quote, they had never seen the artifacts again, end quote. But Igbo-Ukwu's request to NCMM to place some of the bronzes in the local NCMM-run museum were rejected on account of inadequate security infrastructure. A way to break this impasse was suggested by Julie Hudson, the curator responsible for African collections at the British Museum, who was aware of Factum through the exhibition Bakor Monoliths Endangered Heritage, held at the museum in 2023. Hudson made an introduction to Doctors Pamela Jane Smith, the widow of the archaeologist Thurston Shaw, and the Cambridge-based archaeologist Kingsley Darajimba. And together with the community, we developed a collaborative digitization and facsimile project. Next slide, please. A training program in photogrammetry for young members of the Igbo-Ukwu community was planned as the first step, focusing on scanning iconic bronzes selected by community leaders as representative of the corpus. Smith, Darajimba, and the community emphasized the key role of training in local human capacity building, reflecting on Thurston Shaw's pioneering use of it, which, quote, may have been unique in sub-Saharan Africa at the time, end quote. Darajimba continues Shaw's approach in current fieldwork by employing local trainees. Funded by Cambridge Africa, a team from Factum travelled to Lagos in May 2024 to run theoretical and practical workshops in heritage documentation for young community members closely associated with the sites, as well as staff from the museum. It is hoped that the skills imparted will be of use in documenting archaeological finds in future excavations. Next slide, please. Simultaneously, a delegation of Igbo-Ukwu representatives was received at the museum, where they viewed the bronze artifacts, which many had never seen in person. Chief Dr. Eziefe, a founder of the Shaw Institute of Cultural Art, where the facsimiles will be exhibited, describes them as a way of providing easy access and renewing a sense of ownership of the bronzes. In technical terms, there is a disjuncture between the level of resolution at which it is possible to 3D scan and the resolution that can be output through casting. The Igbo-Ukwu bronzes represent some of the most challenging artifacts that Factum has ever tried to reproduce because of their extremely intricate surfaces. To make the facsimiles, a few different techniques were tested. First, the models were 3D printed in wax and directly molded, then cast centrifugally in a crucible that is rotated at high speed to force the molten bronze into the fine detail of the mold. The results were satisfactory, but with room for improvement. Next slide, please. Fortunately, the second trial, using a new method of 3D printing in steel by binding metal powder with a laser, came out with results that rendered the surfaces in extraordinary detail. Next slide, please. The 3D printed artifacts were then electroplated with bronze and patinated to match the original as closely as possible. At a direct cost of approximately 10,000 euros, it has been possible to create exact facsimiles that renew the Igbo-Ukwu community's link with their ancient past. Next slide, please. The facsimiles have now returned to Nigeria and are on display at the University of Nsukka before returning to the community later in the year. Although theft would, of course, be an unfortunate setback, it would not be the irreplaceable tragedy of the loss of the originals. Now, I think I've got time to do my last section on the Benin Bronzes, which is probably the case study that most people would be familiar with. And I'll be delving into the very complex politics of it in this last bit. Can we get the next slide, please? So as we already know, we maybe even had this same very famous picture in Mary's talk. The Benin Bronzes were looted in the British punitive expedition of 1897. And whereas the Bakor Monoliths and Igbo-Ukwu Bronzes are from communities that don't have so much political power, the stakes were much higher in the terms of the Benin Bronzes, in accordance with the financial stakes that go together with international attention. So Factum Foundation's involvement with the Benin Bronzes initially came through the invitation in September 2022 of AMOA, the Edo Museum of West African Art. The museum originated as an initiative of the Nigerian-British businessman Philip Iheanacho, who is of Igbo heritage, so from the same region that the Igbo-Ukwu Bronzes come from, and the governor of Edo State, Godwin Obaseki, formerly a member of the All Progressives Congress, the party of the Oba, the King of Benin. But in summer 2020, Obaseki resigned from APC, the Oba's party, and was re-elected as governor for the opposition's People's Democratic Party. Next slide, please. It's just to give you a bit of the political context. Soon after this, he and Iheanacho announced their plan for a museum to house the Benin Bronzes, releasing the first images of the prospective building in November 2020. Next slide, please. The involvement of the Starchitect, David Adjaye, brought international visibility to the project. Commenting on his plans, Adjaye stated that, quote, "It has to be for the community first and an international site second," end quote. Iheanacho, described in 2021 as the contact person for, quote, "museums around the world planning to return Benin Bronzes," end quote, became a powerful voice advocating for repatriation in a variety of prominent international media outlets. Next slide, please. AMOA collaborated with the British Museum, the German Archaeological Institute, and Cambridge University on an archaeological excavation at the proposed site, which formerly housed a hospital that was demolished and relocated to make way for the new museum. In the 2020 press release, the excavation was described as constituting, quote, "essential early phase work for the building of AMOA, which is being developed to house West African art and artifacts, which will comprise the Royal Collection, the most comprehensive display in the world of Benin Bronzes," end quote. It also had success in generating financial support, reportedly more than $25 million to date, including £3 million that was announced for the initial archaeological phase. A further €6.8 million was contributed by the German government, which, as recently as October 2024, stated, quote, "In order to support the local infrastructure for the proper storage and appropriate exhibition of the repatriated artifacts, the return of the treasures is to be accompanied by the construction of a new museum pavilion on the grounds of the Museum of West African Art," end quote. An evolving component of the museum's vision was to bridge cultural heritage and contemporary art, and to create a hub for training in archaeology and heritage management for students and professionals across Nigeria and West Africa. In short, on paper it seemed in many respects a worthy initiative that had impressive success in a short period of time. But was it built on legitimate foundations? From early on in Factum Foundation's involvement, colleagues at NCMM voiced concerns to us about the idea that the Benin Bronzes could be repatriated to any non-federal entity. AMOA was initially the vehicle of Legacy Restoration Trust, which was registered as a private company, although later transferred to non-for-profit status. When we raised this with the AMOA executive team, they answered that some of the external funds raised for the project came with the proviso that their museum would not be run by NCMM. Therefore, it was impossible. Why then, if there wasn't clarity about the viability of AMOA as a permanent home for the Benin Bronzes, were substantial international funds raised on that premise? Unbeknownst to Factum, 2022 also saw the launch of the OBA's rival bid for funding for the Benin Royal Museum, which received the backing of President Buhari and the creation of a board of trustees. I'll just say as a footnote here that there's a demonstration of how effective MOA was in communicating to the international art world and media. I was fairly keyed into Nigerian cultural heritage, and the fact that there was a rival bid was unknown to me. So I think that says a lot. Nevertheless, in spite of these growing divisions, in the more specific matter of digitization, NCMM provided permission for access to its collections of Benin artifacts in their museums in Lagos and Benin City. And approval from the Royal Court was assumed on the basis of its representation on AMOA's board by the OBA's eldest son, no less. Next slide, please. Factum Foundation's involvement was envisioned as transferring skills and technologies for 3D scanning, 3D printing, and communicating cultural heritage to the museum's technical team, as well as NCMM staff. With a grant from the Ford Foundation to AMOA, a training program in photogrammetry for participants from NCMM and AMOA's technical teams was set up to take place at the National Museums in Lagos and Benin City, with a subsequent session planned for translating the digital data recorded into physical objects through 3D printing. One of the ideas discussed was printing directly in wax, which could then be provided to the bronze casters of Egon Street, thereby combining cutting-edge imaging and outputting technologies with the centuries-old tradition of founding. The first part of that training was held in November 2022. A total of 35 objects were 3D scanned, although some were modern versions made by Egon Street bronze casters. The intention was to include the 3D models in the excellent resource of Digital Benin, which made information about Benin artifacts in public collections worldwide available through an Edo perspective. Next slide, please. Early the following year, the political situation changed, placing a question mark over the project. On the 28th of March 2023, in one of the last acts of Muhammadu Buhari, the outgoing president of Nigeria, to remind you, it's the APC, so the same party as the OBA, was to issue a presidential gazette on behalf of the OBA concerning the Benin Bronzes. It stated that, quote, ownership of the artifacts is vested in the OBA, end quote, and, quote, custody of the repatriated artifacts shall, from wherever and whenever they are brought into Nigeria, be handed to the OBA, end quote. This was instantly seized upon by anti-repatriation voices in Western media, who argued that it effectively involved repatriating to a private individual with no guarantee of public access. So the headlines were the personal property of a local king. What was going on? Alongside the political tensions between the APC and PDP outlined above, the international support and funding received by AMOA was perceived by the OBA as a diversion from his original plan for a Benin Royal Museum. So he took the drastic step of requesting a legislative statement from the president of his ownership of the bronzes. Museums in the UK paused the repatriation process, and countries such as Germany that had already repatriated artifacts were approached for comment, responding that it was unconditional and up to the Nigerian government to decide what to do with them. But how could the German government, which donated millions of euros to a non-federal entity to house the bronzes, claim that it has had no influence in their destination? Following the presidential gazette, AMOA dropped the Edo part from its name, rebranding itself as MOA, and refocused its attention towards contemporary art, mounting a Nigeria pavilion at the Venice Biennale in 2024. The Presidential Gazette also raises the same issue identified above with regard to the Legacy Restoration Trust, or MOA, of placing repatriated artifacts into private hands. However, it should primarily be read as the OBA's response to tensions with the MOA, rather than a statement of the relinquishment of federal responsibility for the bronzes. 8C points to the reality of the situation by referring to the involvement of the federal government of Nigeria in deciding a secure and safe location for them. The plan for their display in the Benin Royal Museum and housing in a recently completed storage facility represents in effect joint custodianship between the federal government, NCMM, and the OBA. Although according to the Presidential Gazette, the bronzes belong de jure to the OBA, public responsibility is de facto guaranteed through NCMM's running the museum. This relationship was formalized on the 12th of February 2025 with the signing of an agreement granting NCMM permission to manage all aspects pertaining to the Benin antiquities, from repatriation, conservation, storage, and exhibition. In many ways, this seems like the right balance. International museums justifiably expect to repatriate artifacts on a government-to-government basis, but political fortunes can change rapidly in Nigeria, whereas there has been an OBA of Benin for centuries, long predating the creation of Nigeria itself. Where did this all leave Factum? We had carried out the first phase of training with the permission of NCMM and the assumed permission of the Royal Court, but the announcement made it obvious that the OBA did not support AMOA, placing our project in a complex ethical quandary. Factum's guiding principle is that all digital data remains the property of the custodian of the original. On account of this, it was essential that new explicit permission from the OBA was received, particularly as the second phase of the training involved teaching the skills required for outputting the digital data as physical facsimiles. However, permission was not sought by AMOA, presumably in the awareness that it would not be granted. Factum had also begun to set up 3D scanning projects with other museums with Benin holdings, which it could no longer do in good conscience. Factum's nightmare was a situation where we were perceived as having wrested control of the Benin bronzes away from their legal owner through our technology. Next slide, final slide, I think. The tensions outlined above came to a head in a process on the 9th of November last year, disrupting the opening of MOA's pavilion building and leading to the indefinite postponement of the project. Having arrived at this lamentable point should provoke reflection in the international heritage and funding communities about confirmation bias and the seductive power of architectural renders. I can include Factum Foundation in this category, though only up till March 2023 when the situation became clearer. Whereas the OBA's projected Royal Museum features a British museum-style classical pediment and portico, Agi's design evokes the traditional round earth structures of the historic OBA's palace. Which is the true Nigerian identity? The answer is surely that it can be both, but it is not for international funders to decide, it is for Nigerians. Thank you.
Can a facsimile become culturally authentic, even if it's not materially original, when it is accepted and used by the source community?
I think absolutely yes. I think there's this interesting kind of, if we're going to put it in philosophical terms, of experientiality and substantiality. And I would say what Factum is able to provide as experiences that are authentic of artworks whose substance isn't the same as the original. So it's able to provide this hopefully meaningful aesthetic experience whilst not trying, you know, in our facsimiles of paintings to be using oil paints, or so you can diverge from the original substance, but provide this aesthetic experience which is authentic.
And another question related to the ownership of the digital data. You already introduced what our position is and your reflection, but if you can maybe get back to that.
Factum's position, as Ferdy said, on ownership to the digital data of the objects we record is unambiguous. So the data always belongs, for all commercial exploitation, all current and future commercial exploitation, to the owner and the custodian of the object. Now, obviously, we can transfer it to the owner at a specific point, and our inherent understanding is if the owner changes, the ownership of the digital data stays with the object, although legally that might be quite difficult to prove. I mean, normally Factum's close relationships with the people we work with lead us to request that this data we're recording is made freely available for the preservation of the objects and for educational, non-commercial educational uses. And I think while that's not always granted, it is more frequently now granted than sometimes in the past. So people have always been very wary about losing control of their objects through losing control of the data. But in this case, I think, as Ferdi made explicitly clear in the complexities surrounding the bedded bronzes, and there were some, inherent statements that may pass unnoticed, that many of the bedded bronzes in collections may not be authentic or original, and may have been produced more recently by the skilled craftsmen in Ecom Street who are carrying on a tradition. And I think there could be a very interesting debate about a falsification, if you like, made locally, and a replica made as a verification by Factum's team. So I think the intention of what is done with the facsimiles can alter the nature of the facsimile. I mean, I would probably pick up on Ferdi's last answer and say, I think there's a very interesting thing. If you think of the whole Greek Aristotelian interest in mimesis and the representation of the external world, and you think in a way that what Factum's work does is applies the same mimetic criteria to the replications that we're making, does this make them works of art and therefore, in a Benjaminian sense, auratic? Or does it actually make them new works of art, new hyper-realist works of art, which can take on a different role? But I think the crucial thing for us is making sure that the data in its digital form and the facsimile in its physical form can help cultivate a deeper understanding with the materiality of the object, and therefore help in communicating more precisely why that object is valued and why it's been valued differently at different times.
Might be added as well the point that whereas we, in principle say that all the data belongs to the custodians, in the case of Nigeria, which doesn't have the resources to be able to store that digital data, we're often doing the storage as part of our commitment to the preservation of the heritage.
Yes, I think long-term secure digital archiving is the elephant in the room. And I think, now Factum's data storage is up to many petabytes. So it's vast, it's incredibly expensive. It's very, very difficult to ensure that there's no data loss, there's no data corruption. And one of the things that we repeatedly come across, I heard a very shocking example last week when I was in Italy, that a whole lot of a major research campaign carried out through, I'm not going to name where it was, but carried out through the early 2000s and the teens and into the 20s, has all been discontinued, therefore lost. So it's very, very easy to lose digital data. It's very, very difficult to safeguard it properly. And I think this is something that is really a European Union within Factum's framework responsibility to ensure digital data is properly preserved and safeguarded.
And also Factum's kind of unique aspect is this mediation between the digital and the physical. And in fact, a facsimile is just the physical manifestation of the digital data. And sometimes for extremely important projects that couldn't be repeated, we're printing out the digital data as noughts and ones on tape. So there is a sort of physical, and we think, well, you know, with AI and all of these things, it's very easy to forget that there is a deeply physical basis to all of it in terms of water storage and electricity generation and all of these things. So
it's a great subject for another Archive Online Academy talk.
Yes,
surely should be addressed. The topic is huge. We have a couple more comments about the intrinsic case that are all interesting cases for thinking about questions of authenticity and mimesis, and for adding this response on data storage. The Nigerian case opens up in very interesting ways. And well, I notice now that it's 5:08, so we should somehow wrap it up. There was another question, maybe we can answer quickly, about what is our position regarding generative AI, even though today it was not really the topic.
Yeah.
Well, I think in a way, generative AI is antithetical to everything Factum does, insofar as what we do is about fidelity to the representation of what the original artwork looks like. However, that's not to say that there's not cases where it might be useful in generating sort of research insights. So the example that Adam mentioned of machine learning, you know, that in a way is an AI analysis of data points that can tell you something about how an artwork was, how and who an artwork was by. So we're not having a kind of troglodytic anti-AI position.
Yeah, and I think there may be good creative roles for generative AI in the case of lost artworks that only exist through a single photograph or something, where you could feed those through different software applications to reimagine the volume. And I think this is where AI could have maybe not right now, but fairly soon, as the knowledge bases and the pattern recognitions embedded within the AI algorithms are able to do more and more.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Ferdi, Adam, and Erik. Mary just disconnected. She's going to say thank you for everybody participating, and for the colleagues of Fondazione Giorgio Cini too. I remind that again, this class, as the whole course is being recorded and will be put online in the following weeks. And next Wednesday we'll have the last class of this course. The title is New Methodologies for the Digital Analysis of Cultural Heritage. We'll have with us colleagues from Bodleian Libraries, Archeops project that Adam quoted before, with William Owen, colleagues here from Factum Foundation, and researchers from the CSIC here in Spain. And the main topic will be digital analysis for cultural heritage, and we'll do a focus on the Celine photometric stereo system applied with other systems to cultural heritage of different various various cultural and scientific heritage. Thank you again for being with us, and well, see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.